everybody, and welcome to another hobby cheating video. And today we're going to talk about doing water, like water effects, puddles of water, whatever, on your base. So I've prepped up 3 bases here for some new Sylvaneth minis I'm working on, and we're going to talk about a couple of things related to water effects. So um, let's just get to the simple tips straight out of the gate. First things first, you'll notice that I've painted the rest of the base already. Like, the base is not flocked. It doesn't have any of the grass or trees or anything I'm going to put on it. For the most part, the solid stuff is on and painted and done. And that's sort of requirement number one. You always want to do your sort of realistic water effects last, or as one of your final things. If you want to put down some plants and stuff, you can over top of it on the dirt. If you're going to have plants in your water, then those need to go on first. So like if I was going to have a little bit of tufts of grass growing out of this water, I'd want to stick that tuft down now and then pour the water around it. Now in this case, I'm not going to have that, so we don't need to worry about it. But if there was going to be a little tuft, say here, or something sticking over the edge of this into the water, I would want that on first before I pour my water, so the water comes up around it and sort of makes it look like it's truly under there. In the same way, anything you put that's going into the water, if it's going to be painted, let's say you're doing a base where you have a skull in the water. That skull would need to be there, that skull would need to be painted. This is probably obvious. If you stop and think about it for a second, I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, but it's worth mentioning because I'll be honest, I've made the mistake before where I put it on there and then primed it and then poured it and was like, oh, yeah, now I can't touch it anymore because I'm dumb. All right, so what did I do here? So these bases, to start out with, were just primed in a dark gray-black, my standard gray-black primer. And then I took white and did a little zenithal over top to get at my rocks and my trees and stuff. But also here in the water, and you can see it on this one the best, if I turn it here so it's not reflecting, you can see how I left a shadow toward the edge. So what we want to do here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some bright Caribbean water for this, right? So if you've ever seen, like, the ocean or stuff right in the Caribbean, it's very like turquoise, very bright, very clear. In any event, what you want is a gradation. So I did this with my airbrush where I have it very bright white here, just fading some out toward the end. And we're going to actually enhance that even more. That's our first step. Because as the water gets deeper, we want to create the illusion of depth. So we want it to be fairly bright here where the dirt or sand or whatever is still showing, and then travel out as the water gets deeper to be darker. Darker colors fall away, and that's going to create the illusion of depth. The other thing we're going to do here is work in lots of different color layers because we want to create some confusion, some tonal variation in the color scheme, and that layer after layer after layer of color and realistic water also is going to serve our need to give the water depth. All right, so I've got the colors I'm going to use here lined up. This is actually not a color. We'll talk about this in a moment. Just like that is to say I don't actually have a color in here. You'll see what I mean. Got my standard dark gray Vallejo model wash. If you've watched any of my hobby cheating videos, you know this is an essential paint, one of my favorites. And once again, it's going to come into use here. We've got my Badger Minotaur Ghost Tint Plasma Fluid. I've used this so often, I've worn off the name, but I assure you that's what it is. It is one of the most beautiful colors in the world, and when you want to do bright, bright blues, boy, there are a few things better. This dries glossy. That is important. Also, we've got our Scale 75 Inkintensity Inktense green here, which is actually a somewhat turquoisey green. And it's an absolutely fabulous color. Also dries glossy. Now, normally I'm very hesitant on things that dry glossy, but in this case where we want the water to have some reflectivity to it, especially the layers under the realistic water, so this is going to be our base, right? We want this to be very shiny so that it reflects light up through the realistic water we're going to put on top, and again, that's going to help create that illusion of depth. So first things first, I've taken a little bit of the dark gray and I watered it down about 50-50 with water over here. It's already a very thin thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, and here at the edge, I'm just going to start dragging some of this out. Okay? Now, my goal here is to create some depth in the water. Then what I'm going to do is very quickly re-wet my brush. Just get a lot of water on there. And I'm going to go ahead and feather that out just slightly. That I just put on there. Because I want to create a nice soft gradation, right? I don't want a lot of it. Then I'm going to grab the edge of that and draw that out again. Okay? You can see that's what we get. Now, I used a lot of water there, so I got this little peel effect you want to kind of avoid. I had a bit too much water on my brush because I was trying to work quickly. But that's okay. We can correct it. And honestly, it's gonna work in our favor for this because it'll kind of look like a ridge line. We can use that to an advantage. But there we go. Correct it out, and now you really can't see that because it's reflecting. There we go. Now you can see I've enhanced that darkness there a little bit. I could have done that with an airbrush too, but you know, whatever. No reason not to. By the way, if you don't have an airbrush, just paint the whole thing white and then go from there. One other little interesting note that I should have mentioned right off of the top, but I'm glad I remembered it now. You'll notice I'm using a standard GW base here, but you'll notice this is very flat and smooth, and if you look, you can see a little ridge. So my little hot tip, my little cheating hot tip for doing realistic water, when you want it to look very flat, when you don't want a lot of material in it, if you want to do a nice like crystal sort of pond, is your best friend is something like this. Sprue plastic, right? Whenever you want a nice smooth flat pond, you can see what I did here is just cut out the sprue plastic out of this and then cut it to shape here. What that gives me is an ultra flat surface to work on and to make the water pour very evenly, because that's what I want here. Now, if you're trying to do like a grimy, muddy puddle with, you know, bits of detritus and stuff, you don't have to worry about it. You're just going to put down some kind of grit or sand and pour over top of it in a depression. But in this case, I want it to be really smooth. Okay, so let's keep going. I'm going to show you again on this one. This is nice small, so we don't want a huge effect this time. So we're going to get most of the paint off the brush, and then we're just going to quickly draw out some darker area here. Okay. And then we're going to just feather that out slightly. Okay. So you can see we get a nice smooth gradient there. The other thing I did is I took just a little bit of the black and I traced right around the edge of my water. Not heavy, I just want to make sure that that's nice and dark. Because even though it is lighter towards there, there's always a bit of wetness right around the edge that sort of kind of gathers and darkens that edge. And so we want to capture that. Okay. So one more time with our shadow effect here, right? And then we very quickly rinse off our brush. And we're just going to feather out that edge. Just smooth it right out. There we go. Much better. Okay. And we line real quick and we're good to go. All right, so now, also where there's this overhanging rock, I'm going to be a little heavier with the shadow because I really want to capture that that's creating a shadow in the water there. All right, so now we've pre-shaded, and a lot of working with realistic water is pre-shading because, again, it's about creating that depth of color. So let's go back to the first base. So since I said, like I said, I'm going for like a Caribbean type thing, that's going to set my colors to these. If you were doing, like I want a very bright, almost mystic blue water. If you were going to do different colors, you would follow the same steps I'm going to, just with your own colors. So in general, we're going to cover the whole thing with our bright color, whatever we want the majority of our water to be. And then we're going to take our darker color, which in this case is the turquoise, and we're going to draw it out kind of over the shadow. And again, not in the exact place. I'm not going to try to mimic this exact dark gray, but I'm going to just have it fade into there. And the reason is, again, because I want this to create the illusion of depth. So we start with our plasma fluid, which is a fairly light colored paint. Okay. Now, it is also a fairly powerful paint because it's meant to be airbrushed, and so it does have some kick to it. So I'm going to water it down some. Not a ton. Not quite 50-50. A little bit less. Now what I'm going to do is just literally take this and I'm going to just cover the whole area. But I'm always, you'll notice the direction of my brush is such that I'm always going to come out. Okay? The reason for that is because paint tends to deposit where your brush stops. And I want more paint out than in, right? That is to say, I want this area at the bottom to capture the majority of the paint. Now that's very streaky right now, but don't worry about it. That's not a problem. We'll let that dry. We don't have to worry about too much. That's one of the nice parts about this is that kind of streakiness doesn't really show through once we're all done here. So again, we're just going to go ahead and pull the paint out. Try to be nice and smooth with it. All right. So the goal here, you can see we're actually going to use some of that streakiness to our advantage later. But if you're getting it, like I said, you don't have to. We're going to actually integrate that into our paint scheme, but you don't have to. If you don't want that streakiness, then you're just going to come very carefully. You're going to make sure you got plenty of water. And by the way, if you don't have like the plasma fluid, which I would recommend you pick up, but if you don't happen to have that, you could use, say, this actual blue glaze, this Guillemot blue, or you could use any sort of light blue just watered way down. So you don't have to use this exact color. I just happen to be completely in love with this color, so there you go. All right, so now you can see we've turned our bases blue. We've still got it lighter towards the inside. Now, it's going to take about 2 coats of this to really get it to set, because I do want this to be fairly blue. So what I'm going to do is pause here, let this dry. I'm going to apply a second coat, let that dry, and then I'll be back. All right, and we're back. So you can see second coat is applied and dried, smoothed out some, but we left a little streakiness. The reason I pulled in that direction constantly is because it's going to create this nice effect of the sort of light hitting the water, but very subtly once we get the realistic water effect over it. So now you can see the blue is a little more rich, but we still want to push this a little farther. And then, like I said, the name of the game when you're doing this sort of realistic water is undershading. Now in this case, as I said, I'm going for this sort of Caribbean thing. If you were doing this, let's say you wanted a murky, gross Nurgle swamp. Okay, fine. I would use some Nurgle's Rot here as my base, and then I would take something like an Agrax or something like that, something dark brown, and I would pull it out here at the edge in the same way I'm about to do with this turquoise. So now what I'm going to do again with the Inktense green is I'm just going to go ahead and get some of that on there, and I'm just going to work it in to the outside here. Now again, you'll notice it's not moving the color a whole huge amount, and that's okay. We don't need it to. Okay? We're not looking to make a huge cataclysmic shift here. We're just trying to tint a little bit of green into our base here. Okay? So with 2 nice coats, you can see what we get. There's a nice little green sheen there, and if it pools up a little like that, because it is an ink and it's kind of thin, we just go in and kind of pull it out, make sure we smooth it around, spread it out. In this case, we don't need to worry as much about the directionality. We want to get that green tint. That is really not showing up on camera, but I assure you in real life, there is a wonderful green tint now to the edge of this. Okay? Boy, that just looks like I didn't do a thing, doesn't it? Let me see if I can change my lighting and we can get some of that green in there. Nope, that didn't do a thing. Okay. Anyway, it's happening. You'll just have to trust me. So, again, we work in the green. This is going to be the same thing. Maybe that will show up better. That looks darker at least, so I got that going for me. That's nice. But again, same thing. We're going to do 2 coats of this, but you notice I'm only doing the bottom half. Okay? So I'm going to put that on, let that dry, and the key here where we're getting, once we get 2 coats of this down towards the edge, and by the way, I'm not going to do them at the exact same depth. Like that is to say here, let's say my green starts here. Okay? Like at this line. The next time I'm going to do it mixed in different ways. Like I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to move down, and I'll go into only here. I'm going to kind of vary it, right? So that's what we're going to do next. All right, so that will be what I do. I'm going to let this dry, smooth out that ink, let it dry, do a second coat, and we'll be back in a minute. All right, and we're back. So 2 coats of our green are applied. It still doesn't really show, but I assure you it's there. By the way, if you want to do this the other way around, if you want to de-emphasize the green, you can do the green first and then put like a blue over top. The point is you can mix this in a lot of different ways to different effects. As long as your darker color is toward the deeper part of your water, it doesn't really matter. Order, and you can keep mixing with this, by the way. I could, if I really wanted to create like a drop-off, I could really darken this down. The key is you do it in repeated thin washes or glazes, okay? And again, any combination of sort of water that you can imagine is good. So you can use like, you can mix in your Athonian camo shades, your this one. You mix in this one. You get the idea. Blues, green, yellows, browns, everything you would expect to see in nature. All right, so now we're going to actually apply our water effect. So now we're going to come to this. So this looks a lot like some Guilliman. This is a Space Marine guy. Blue, but it's not. So what this is when I'm doing an army and I want to keep all my water the same tint, because you don't want to use realistic water really straight out of the pot or out of this. So this is the basic thing. This is Woodland Scenic's realistic water. There you go. You get 16 ounces for, I don't know, about 20 bucks probably. And it'll last you for certainly a lot more than an army. It'll last you for a long time. What I do is I save my old pots of glaze and wash and shade. And so here what I did is I took some of the realistic water and I pipetted it in. And then I mixed in, so you can see in there, I actually mixed in some of the blue glaze that this contained out of the newer, out of a newer pot, and mix it up. And that means what I can do is every time I use it, I can just shake it, just like I would a normal thing. And now what I've got is a pre-mixture. It's exactly tinted how I want, because you want to tint your realistic water a little to, again, start creating more tonal variation to add some additional shade. So what we're going to do now is open that up. And by the way, it won't dry out in here or like form into a puddle or whatever. It'll be fine. And we're going to grab a little medicine dropper. Now, my little medicine, you can see it's all gunky from all the times I use it. I get these at like the grocery store. You get like 2 little pipettes or medicine droppers for like $1. So, don't buy anything nice. You don't need it. Just get some crappy medicine droppers. I'm going to fill up that medicine dropper. And what I'm going to do is just dropper it very slowly. You can see I'm just squeezing the little thing, and I'm pop that bubble. And I'm just going to push it around. Now the nice part about the base is you don't, when you're doing this on bases, is you don't need to be too incredibly thick with it. You notice I don't really have anything under this. I should probably have this on like a paper towel or something so I don't get water over the edge onto my thing. But for the most part, the natural sort of adherence or cohesion, whichever one it is, adhesion or cohesion, of this liquid will hold it together. Adhesion. It sticks to each other better. Maybe. Or is that cohesion? Darn it. I don't remember. Anyways, you can see what I'm doing here is just literally piping it onto the bases. Move the last one up in here. You do want to have a nice flat even surface when you do this. I'm trying to keep it in the area of where the water is. Now if I get a little bit up over top, that's okay. No big deal. If it gets a little up onto your mud, great, good. Then that just becomes a darker color that is your mud color. And you can go pretty high on there, and it'll stick. So there we go. I pipette that out. Now comes the fun part, the waiting game. This stuff takes a while to dry, and you want to let it set completely. Now, in general, depending, like when I'm doing it like this on a base, because it's so thin, I don't need a huge amount of layers. It generally takes like 2 applications. If I was dumping this, and realistic water doesn't tend to shrink a huge amount. It depends on the product you're using. I like the realistic water. It has a good effect. The best is magic water, but it's also the most expensive, and it's the hardest to use in small amounts like this. The realistic water is nice because I can just mix it up. I can put it in the pot, and I can call it a day. And I'd rather just apply it twice and let it dry, and I can just, move on and be working on something else while I'm doing this. I let these dry for several hours and then go to something else. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry completely and set. So this is going to be hours. I usually let this dry bare minimum 8 hours. Okay, you probably want to wait at least that for a thin layer like this. Now, if you're dumping a big amount of this in something, like if you've got a really deep puddle on a base or on a piece of terrain or diorama or something, and you've got it like thick, like, it's that deep in there, be prepared to wait, more than a day. But as it is, 6 to 8 hours from now, this should be nice and dry. So, by the time when we pick up next, that amount of time will have passed. Probably more, because I'm going to go back in and apply a second layer, do the exact same thing, just pipette some out with my medicine dropper, let it dry again. Okay? And then that'll give me a nice, deep amount of this, and you can see how it's creating, it smooths, effectively it's smoothing out the color transitions underneath. And so what we're going to get is a nice, even transition of our color. All right? So we'll be back many hours from now for me, but only a few seconds for you with a second layer applied. Let's see what they look like. All right, and we're back. It has been many hours, as you saw, and there we go. Our water's all set. Like I said, that's 2 applications. So, same story both times again, just using my premix here of the Woodland Scenics. Oh, goodness sakes. Of the Woodland Scenics Realistic Water and some of the Ghielman Blue. Basically, I just mixed a little bit in. There might be a question about, well, how much do you mix in? A couple drops until it looks right. That's the answer. Like, less than you think. That's my best advice I can give. I can't give you an exact recipe. Depends on exactly how much realistic water you're using, what product you're using. But if you're going to do a whole army with, some kind of water base, I really would recommend using this, or even one of the new bigger pots for washes if you empty one of those out. Or just, a big dropper bottle, something that's airtight and that you can mix a lot of all at once. That way you get a consistent watercolor. And you can see I really like how those came out. You can see the sort of shade effect. There's some, some of these have a little bit of detritus in there. We used kind of the streaking to our advantage to create kind of the illusion of the sand and everything getting swept away, pulled down into the darker area of the water. So I really like how those came out. It creates that sort of natural fogginess, and you can see the layer to it, where we go from the lighter down to a darker color. If you want to push that transition even more, like in reality, these look a little darker than they're showing on camera. I'll include some photos, of course, as always, at the end. But what's left now is obviously to do up the rest of the base. Put your flock on, put your miniatures on. I'm going to finish them out completely, and then that'll be the pictures you see at the end with the miniatures with the flock and such on. So real quick, let's recap our tips for using the realistic water. 1, make sure you do the rest of the base first. You want to have an area to capture the water. So in this I did the grit and sand around and left an open space. Two, if you want a nice, really flat sheen, like something like this, like I did, then you want to smooth out the surface. An easy tip for doing that, as I mentioned, is sort of a sprue pack. You know, you just cut the plastic off, stick it down there, you put the mud on top, around the edge, that way it looks natural, and there you go. If you want something rough, put your grit or whatever there and then put the water over top of it, and you'll get sort of, if you want like a natural muddy pond or something, right? Always, if you're going to have anything in the water, it needs to be in there and painted before you pour the water. So if there's a skull in there or a body or a sword sticking out of the lake, you know, whatever the case is, it needs to be there first before you pour any water. Pre-shading is your friend. This is all a game of undershading. Start white, work your darks out towards the edge of the base, so you create the illusion of depth where you're going from very shallow water down to very deep water. Always mix your colors accordingly. So that is to say, when you undershade, if you're going to do, like here, as I said, I was doing like a Caribbean. If you're going to do like a murky water, there's a very popular scheme for like Nurgle, right? Then you would start with maybe like a Nurgle's Rod or a light green over the white up here and go down into a brown or even black green here, depending on how, you know, really gross and awful you wanted the water to be. Always have your water near the edge. One thing that I would say is you can put water completely in the center, like surrounded, but never make it a perfect circle. That's really going to look weird. In general, I'm a fan of having water going up to the edge. That way you get the impression that it's bigger. One of the problems with having water in just like, unless it's a couple little puddles spread around. So like if I was going to do like a small puddle here and a small puddle here and a small puddle here, that would be fine. There's nothing wrong with that because then that just sort of looks natural. But if you just have one and it's perfectly centered, it can just ring a little hollow. It can also be hard to put your fig onto later. So, you know, I think in general, the look that I really prefer is going toward the edge of the base so that it looks like it's part of some larger water feature. But that's, you know, your mileage may vary there. If you are going to put it in the center and have it completely surrounded by mud, make sure you have a varied edge line. Like you can see how this, you know, isn't like a perfect circle or hack out of it, right? It's got a natural wave to it. Okay? And then obviously the final thing is, yes, think about where your miniature is going to sit on here. Don't you, you know, like if your miniature is going to be in the water, he's going to have his feet in the water, then you're going to need to get something to do water effects, to do ripples. So Woodland Scenics also makes a water effects product, which you can use and build up ripples. If you're going to have a foot down in that water, then it has to be displacing water. So you need to have like little ripples going out from it or something like that. Or you need to have the model on there first if he's really been standing there for a while. Like that is to say, if he didn't just step in there, if he's not in motion, if it's a statue or something that's down in the water, then again, we return to the previous advice, make sure it's down in there before you pour the water. All right, so there you go. I hope that helps you do some realistic water on your bases. Like I said, we'll close out at the end with a little photo once I get these all done up, but I hope you very much enjoyed. Give it a like if you liked it. Subscribe for more hobby cheating in the future. Share it with a friend if they've got questions or you want to direct somebody over here. That's always the best and nicest thing you can do. I really do appreciate that, and I appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time.